There is a jellyfish that does not age. When it gets old or injured, it simply reverts to a younger version of itself and starts over, and it can do this, as far as we know, forever. There are clams that have lived for over 500 years, trees that have stood for thousands. These aren't science fiction. They're alive right now. And here's what makes that so strange. Every cell in your body is, in principle, capable of repairing itself. Your body fixes wounds, replaces blood, rebuilds bone, regrows skin. It is, quite literally, a self-repairing machine. So if your body already knows how to repair itself, and if some living things never age at all, then the obvious question is the one almost nobody asks. Why does it ever stop? Why doesn't it just keep fixing you forever? The answer is one of the strangest and most debated ideas in all of biology. To get there, we have to start with a question that sounds almost too simple to be serious. Why does anything age at all? For most of human history, the answer seemed obvious. Things wear out. A knife dulls, a road cracks, a machine breaks down. Bodies, the thinking went, are no different. You run them for enough years and the parts simply give out. Aging was just damage. The slow, inevitable accumulation of wear, the same way anything physical falls apart over time. But the closer biologists looked, the less that explanation held up. Because your body is not a machine that only wears down. It is constantly rebuilding itself from the inside every single day. The lining of your gut is replaced every few days. Your skin sheds and regrows. Most of your red blood cells are only a few months old. The body you have right now is not the body you had a year ago. Vast amounts of it have been torn down and built back since then. You are less an object than a process, a pattern that maintains itself by constant renewal. So here is the puzzle in its sharpest form. If your body can rebuild itself this completely, this constantly, then in principle, there's no reason it ever has to stop. A self-repairing system that keeps repairing should, in theory, last indefinitely. And yet it doesn't. At some point, slowly, the repairs start falling behind the damage. The rebuilding slows. The system that spent decades maintaining itself perfectly begins, quietly, to let things slide. That's the real mystery of aging. Not why we get damaged. Everything gets damaged. The mystery is why a body that knows how to fix itself eventually chooses not to. And the word chooses is the key, because this brings us to the first major idea, and it's a strange one. What if aging isn't a flaw in the system at all? What if it's a feature? To understand how that could possibly make sense, you have to stop thinking about your body and start thinking about evolution. And evolution does not care about you the way you care about you. Natural selection has exactly one currency: getting genes into the next generation. A trait spreads if it helps an organism reproduce, and it fades if it doesn't. That's the entire engine. And crucially, evolution can only see a trait while it's actually affecting reproduction. Once an organism has reproduced and raised its young, from evolution's cold accounting, its job is essentially done. This single fact changes everything, and it leads directly to the first of three competing theories for why we age. Hold on to the idea that evolution stops paying attention after reproduction, because all three theories are, in different ways, about what happens in that blind spot. The first theory is called mutation accumulation, and it was proposed by the biologist Peter Medawar in the 1950s. Here's the logic. Random genetic mutations happen all the time. Some are harmless, some are useful, and some are harmful. But the harmful ones come with timing. A mutation that causes a deadly problem at age 10 will be ruthlessly eliminated by natural selection, because the people carrying it tend to die before they reproduce, taking the mutation with them. But a mutation that causes an identical deadly problem at age 70 is almost invisible to evolution. By 70, you've likely already reproduced. The damage comes after your genes have been passed on, so natural selection has no grip on it. It can't weed out something it can't see. So, over countless generations, Medawar argued, harmful mutations that only act late in life are never cleaned out. They pile up in the genome, harmless to evolution but not to you, all set to go off in the body's later years. Under this theory, aging is essentially a garbage drawer of late-acting damage that evolution simply never had a reason to clear out. It's not designed, it's just neglected. There's a real human example that fits this pattern almost perfectly. Huntington's disease is a devastating genetic disorder, but its symptoms usually don't appear until a person is in their 30s or 40s, typically after they've already had children. Because the gene does its damage late, after it's already been passed on, natural selection has never been able to purge it. It slips through the blind spot, generation after generation, exactly as Medawar's theory predicts. Late-acting harm is, to evolution, almost invisible. The second theory takes that idea and makes it darker and more elegant. It's called antagonistic pleiotropy, proposed by the biologist George Williams in 1957, and it might be the most important idea in the entire study of aging. Pleiotropy just means a single gene that does more than one thing. Antagonistic means those things pull in opposite directions. Put them together, and you get the central, unsettling possibility. What if some of the very same genes that make you strong and fertile when you're young are the ones that damage you when you're old? Imagine a gene that boosts your body's growth and reproductive power in your 20s, a clear evolutionary win because it helps you reproduce. But imagine that same gene, still switched on decades later, now drives processes that harm you: tissue, overgrowth, cellular wear, disease. Evolution would still favor that gene. Overwhelmingly, because the benefit lands early when it boosts reproduction and the cost lands late after reproduction is mostly done, in evolution's blind spot. Natural selection would happily trade a worse old age for a stronger youth every single time, because the youth is the part that makes more copies of the gene. This is the chilling core of antagonistic pleiotropy. Under this theory, aging isn't neglect, like the first theory said. It's a price, a bill that comes due in old age for advantages that were paid out in youth. The same biology that built you up may be wired to wear you down, and evolution actively selected for that trade because it never had to live with the second half of the deal. And this isn't just a thought experiment. There's a real mechanism inside your cells that looks almost exactly like antagonistic pleiotropy in action, and it's worth understanding on its own, because it's one of the clearest windows into how aging actually works. It involves the tips of your chromosomes. Inside almost every cell, your DNA is bundled into chromosomes, and on the end of each chromosome sits a protective cap called a telomere. Think of it like the plastic tip on the end of a shoelace, the part that stops the lace from fraying. Every time a cell divides to make a copy of itself, those caps get a little shorter. They're sacrificed to protect the important genetic information further in. And after a cell has divided enough times, the telomeres wear down so far that the cell can no longer divide safely. At that point, it stops dividing altogether and enters a state scientists call senescence. Here's where it gets strange. This shortening isn't a flaw, it's a safety feature. A cell that could divide endlessly, ignoring all the usual limits, is essentially the definition of cancer. So the telomere countdown acts as a brake, a built-in limit on how many times a cell can copy itself, protecting you from runaway growth when you're young, exactly when cancer would be most costly to your chances of reproducing. But that same brake, running for decades, is also part of why your tissues slowly lose their ability to renew. The very mechanism that protects you from cancer in youth contributes to your decline in age. A benefit early, a cost late, the exact shape of antagonistic pleiotropy written into the ends of your chromosomes. The third theory ties the whole thing to energy, and it's called the disposable Soma theory, proposed by the biologist Thomas Kirkwood in 1977. Soma just means the body. All of you except the cells that make the next generation. And the word disposable is doing a lot of work. Here's the idea. Every organism has a limited budget of energy. It can spend that energy on two broad things: maintaining and repairing its own body, or reproducing, and it cannot pour everything into both. There's a trade-off. Kirkwood argued that evolution tunes each species to split that budget in whatever way gets the most genes into the future. And for most animals, in a dangerous world full of predators and accidents, pouring endless energy into perfectly maintaining a body that will probably be eaten or killed anyway is a waste. Better to spend that energy reproducing now while you still can. So under this theory, the body is, in a sense, deliberately built to be only good enough, maintained well enough to survive and reproduce, but not built to last forever, because lasting forever was never worth the energy. The body becomes, in Kirkwood's stark word, disposable, a temporary vehicle, maintained just long enough to pass on the genes inside it and then allowed to wind down. Aging, in this view, is the visible result of evolution choosing reproduction over endless repair. There's a striking pattern in the animal world that supports this. As a rule, animals that are hunted constantly and die young tend to age fast even in safety, while animals that are hard to kill tend to age slowly. A mouse, surrounded by predators and lucky to survive a year in the wild, ages and dies in roughly 2 years, even when kept perfectly safe in a lab. Its body was never built to last, because in the wild it almost never got the chance to. But consider an animal that flies, like a bat. Flight lets it escape most predators, so it's far more likely to survive. And bats, despite being small like mice, can live 30 years or more. Same rough size, wildly different lifespans, and the difference tracks almost perfectly with how dangerous each animal's world is. Where survival is likely, evolution invests in a lasting body. Where it isn't, it doesn't bother. That's the disposable Soma theory, visible across the entire animal kingdom. So which of the three is right? Mutation accumulation, the garbage drawer of late damage, antagonistic pleiotropy, the bill that comes due for a stronger youth, or the disposable Soma, the body built only good enough to last? And here is the honest answer, the one that makes this topic so genuinely unsettled. It's probably not one of them. It's probably all three, tangled together, operating at once. They're not really rival explanations, so much as three different views of the same underlying truth. That evolution stops protecting you once you've done the one thing it cares about. But if that's the whole story, we're left with a problem. A glaring one, because some organisms didn't take the deal. Remember the jellyfish from the beginning. Remember the clam that lived 500 years, and the trees that live for thousands. If aging is the inevitable result of evolution's blind spot after reproduction, how do these creatures escape it? How does anything live for centuries without winding down? The jellyfish is the strangest case of all, so it's worth understanding what it actually does. It's a tiny creature, smaller than your fingernail, and when it's starving, injured, or simply old, it does something almost no other animal can. Its cells transform. A mature cell can revert into a completely different, younger type of cell, a process biologists call transdifferentiation. The whole animal effectively rewinds, collapsing back into an earlier stage of its own life cycle, and then grows up all over again. It's not immortal in the sense of being impossible to kill. Predators and disease still take them constantly. But left alone, it has no fixed expiration date written into it. It can, in principle, run the loop forever. So how do these creatures escape aging when we can't? The answer is that they aren't exceptions to the rules. They're proof of the rules. Look closely at the organisms that barely age, and you find that almost all of them live very differently from us. Many of them never really stop growing. Many reproduce throughout their entire lives, not in a single burst of youth, which means evolution never gets that clean, after-reproduction blind spot to stop caring. And many of them live in conditions where they aren't constantly killed by predators or accidents, which changes the whole energy calculation. When a body is likely to survive, it becomes worth maintaining. The disposable Soma theory predicts exactly this. Where survival is likely and reproduction never ends, evolution should invest in lasting bodies. And it does. That immortal jellyfish doesn't break the logic of aging. It follows it perfectly to a different conclusion. Its strange biology, the ability to revert to a younger form, to keep its options open indefinitely, is what you'd expect from an organism where the usual trade-offs simply don't apply. The clam, slow and cold and rarely threatened in the deep, is cheap to maintain and worth maintaining. The ancient tree, still growing, still reproducing after 1,000 years, never hands evolution the blind spot that lets aging accumulate. These creatures aren't cheating the system. They're running the same equations we are, with different numbers plugged in, and getting centuries where we get decades. So which is it? Is aging a drawer of damage evolution forgot to clean out? A bill that comes due for the strength of youth? The body spending itself on reproduction instead of repair? The honest answer is that nobody fully knows, and the truth is almost certainly some braid of all three, shaped differently in every species by the specific dangers and trade-offs of its world. We are not looking at a solved problem. We're looking at one of the deepest open questions in biology, with the answer written, in different dialects, into every living thing. But here is what we can say. Aging is not simply your body breaking down, the way a machine wears out. It is something far stranger and more deliberate than that. It is the long shadow of a deal struck across billions of years, a deal in which evolution, caring only about the next generation, built bodies brilliant at being young and indifferent to being old. You were not designed to last. You were designed to pass something on and then, quietly, to step aside. Every living thing carries some version of this same arrangement. The mouse that ages in 2 years and the tortoise that lasts 200 are running the same fundamental logic, tuned to different worlds. So is the bat outliving the mouse by decades, the jellyfish that simply starts over, the clam counting its centuries in the cold and the dark. And so are you, a self-repairing machine, astonishing in its capacity to rebuild itself, running on a budget written long before you existed by a process that built you to be young and never quite got around to keeping you that way. So the next time you think of growing older as your body wearing out, remember the jellyfish, reverting endlessly to its youth in the warm water. Remember the clam, alive since before Shakespeare. They prove it didn't have to be this way. Aging was never inevitable. It was a choice, not yours, and not really anyone's, but a choice all the same, made for you by something that only ever cared whether you passed the torch, and never once asked how long you'd get to hold it.